Hey, hello, and welcome in. My name is Temps, and this is my creepy corner of the internet. Today, we're going to look through some of the creepiest Reddit stories around, so get comfy as we dive into the first chilling story. The bloody man at the door. This happened many years ago. I think I was 12 at the time. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in an old 2-story Victorian house. We lived in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains, on a corner of a quiet street. It was a cool area to grow up in, lots of nature to explore, and few fences to stop kids and their dogs from exploring it. I'm the oldest of 4, but at this time, my parents didn't think I was old enough to stay at home taking care of them by myself for a night, so they hired a babysitter to watch us. I had a huge crush on her. She was 17 and gorgeous, so I was okay with the deal. It was just a normal summer night, warm and with a bright moon. It was late, probably around 11 p.m. My brother and sisters had gone to bed. I was up reading, and the babysitter was watching TV downstairs. Me and my little brother shared a big room on the 2nd floor that looked out over the front yard. I was reading in my bed when suddenly my brother, in a frightened, tight voice, called my name. I thought he was dreaming. But then he stood bolt upright in bed and stared out the window. This obviously freaked me the fuck out, so I ran over to him. My brother then pointed out what he was looking out and asked me, "Who is that man?" Down in the front yard, about 20 yards away, was a lanky, long-haired man looking up into the sky. His arms were outstretched, and he was slowly spinning. Then he started moaning. I immediately started to panic. This was how some of those horror movies start. I jumped up and ran out into the hallway, for once glad that my parents had not put me in charge. Waiting for me in the hallway were my sisters, who had been woken up by the noise outside, and the babysitter came tearing up the stairs, wide-eyed. Now I was really scared. Nobody knew what to do, and the sitter wasn't offering up any ideas. For some reason, I decided to call our neighbor across the street. He was a true curmudgeon, but he knew us. I guess I figured he wouldn't be scared. I grabbed the phone. No cell phones or even cordless ones back then. He answered after a few rings, and I asked him if he could see anyone out front. We saw him on the front lawn, which he had a clear view of from his house. He was obviously annoyed, but he did go look. A couple minutes later, he returned to the phone and told me there was nothing, and I needed to go back to bed. Click. We were in no state to do that. I quickly returned to my brother's window and looked again. Big moon flooding the lawn with light. No man. We tried to listen for the moaning. Nothing but the symphony of crickets. The sitter was not going back downstairs alone, and nobody else was going to sleep anytime soon. We all agreed we should go down together and make sure all the doors and windows were locked. We crept downstairs and quickly broke into 2 groups to check all the doors. I was with the sitter to check the front, my siblings the back of the house. All went well. Locks were secured. No weirdos barging into the house, but the sitter wanted me to look outside one more time. I was still fucking scared, conjuring up way too many Friday the 13th and Halloween scenes in my head that my friends and I had covertly watched on their cable during sleepovers. But I didn't want to show it in front of the woman of my dreams. Just one more look, and maybe, just maybe, I'd get to be in something like that Revenge of the Nerds movie I also wasn't supposed to watch. So I quietly moved to the front window, which faced the front steps to our front door. I craned my neck to look out towards the driveway and back towards the lawn where we had seen him before. Nothing. And then suddenly he was there, running full speed at the window. Half his face was gone, a mess of blood and torn flesh. He has blood all down his shirt and on his shorts. The sitter screamed, and I dropped to the floor in the most unmanly way possible. My siblings were crying in the hallway. He started pounding on the front door and yelling incoherently. I remember him saying at some point, to let me in, please. Even though that seemed extremely polite for a mass murderer, there was no fucking way I was going to acquiesce to that request. I was frozen in fear on the floor. The most I could muster in a squeaky little boy voice was, "We can't help you. Please go away." At least I did something. Our protector, the sitter, was long gone. He pounded on the door some more, gave a disappointed and helpless final yelp, and staggered off into the night. I just laid there for a little while. After that, my siblings ran upstairs and huddled together. Soon after, 20 minutes or so, we saw lights and sirens. The sitter had done the same thing in her flight into the bowels of our home, and did the one thing that had never occurred to the rest of us: call 911. They found the bloody man wandering down the street, and our nightmare was over. Turned out, he was a cyclist that went out for a full moon ride on a beautiful summer night. But he didn't see the storm ditch on our corner when he took a tight turn at high speed. He slid on his face for at least 20 feet. He eventually came to, but he was so delirious from his injuries and the shock that he was off his rocker. He had been wandering around for a while before any of us knew he was there. We found blood trails crisscrossing the front of the property the next morning. I still feel bad I didn't help him, but I was just a scared kid. My parents didn't go out without us for a while. For years, I was traumatized coming home at night, and nothing ever came of my infatuation. I don't think I ever saw her again, but my brother still loves to mimic what I said that night. Bastard. I think I woke up to a gray alien in my room last night. I've been up since 5 a.m. and I just can't get this off my mind. So last night, I'm sleeping, and I'm having a nightmare that I'm in an apartment, looking into a kitchen area, and the drawers, cabinets, and a door to the pantry were all opening, closing, and moving by themselves, almost like poltergeist activity. I was scared in the dream, so I began praying, and then my wife, who was in bed next to me, kicked my foot and woke me up because I was clearly distressed and mumbling a lot in my sleep. Here's where things get weird. I jump awake because my wife kicked my foot, and feeling relieved to not be having a nightmare anymore, I turn my head towards my wife, who was laying behind me, and say, "Thank you, babe. I'm really sorry about that. I was having a nightmare." But I don't hear any response, so I figure that she's already fallen back to sleep, or might just be so tired that she's still kind of out of it. Then I turn my head back to facing forwards, the direction I was facing the whole time I was sleeping, and I notice something in the corner of the room, standing in front of the bedroom door. The room was dark, but its skin still appeared to be like a dark, matte gray color. It was really thin, had thin legs and long, thin arms, a small, almost childlike torso, a narrow neck, and then a really big, bulbous head with huge black almond-shaped eyes. It looked exactly like a traditional gray alien, but it was slightly transparent. Needless to say, I was shocked, and to be honest, my very first reaction was that I was seeing things because I just woke up. So I rub my eyes, and it's still right there. Trying not to panic, and trying to come up with a rational explanation for it, I thought this must just be dream chemicals still working in my brain. So I sit up slightly and look into the other corner of our bedroom by the closet, expecting to see something there too. But there's nothing. Then I look at the ceiling. Nothing. The floor. Nothing. The other wall. Nothing. I look back at the corner by the bedroom door, and it's still right there, standing there, completely still, just staring at me with its huge jet black eyes, which were shaped like almonds, and appeared to wrap just slightly around the side of its head, much, much larger than a human's eyes. And it's still slightly transparent, but I'm seeing it clearly, and only in that one spot, too. Not anywhere else in the room now, because the Texas power grid sucks. I always sleep with a flashlight next to the bed, and after seeing this thing for about a minute and a half, it occurs to me to grab the flashlight. I lean off the bed, reach down, and grab the flashlight, and shine it in the corner of the room at this being. And because it's transparent, it became much less visible when I shined the light on it. I could still see it very slightly, but it was much less. Again, in disbelief at what I was seeing, I begin slowly scanning the whole room with the flashlight. From the bed, of course. I wasn't going to try getting out of bed. I was way too scared, to be honest. And again, I see absolutely nothing strange anywhere in the room at all, except for this thing I can see in the one corner by the bedroom door. I turn the flashlight off, and instantly, I can see it super clearly again, just staring at me. I rub my eyes again and squeeze my eyes together tightly, hoping that when I opened them, it'd be gone. But it wasn't. So finally, I begin truly freaking out internally, and I just began praying out loud. And after about 20 seconds of praying, I literally watched this thing just fade out of existence, dematerialize right in front of me. It was still standing there dead still and staring at me the whole time. It just seemed to suddenly begin becoming increasingly transparent until it was just not there anymore, and it was gone. I've been awake since then. Spent the rest of the night reading random stuff here on Reddit to try and distract myself because the experience shook me up quite a bit, to be honest. I feel so genuinely weirded out that I just don't know what to make of it, to be honest. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions, especially from someone with experience. I believe I had a close encounter with something strange in Mendocino National Forest. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks, forests, because it's isolate, so my dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy, rough drives into the park sometimes, and lack of service assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain, around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continue to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and And that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them. So I stop my car, but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. And the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened. Cool. But I remember this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me, as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information, as well as some Native American lore, that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year, I've mentioned this place to a few people, and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once, and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature. Hence, my fascination in this little event, lol. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 3 hours left, and the sun had set. So we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are, and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. He did. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore, and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically, because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange AF, and I start Googling Wendigos, etc., etc. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is another family goes missing in Mendocino, and I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing, and do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling, both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling. On top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seemed strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization, LOL. Does anyone know about authentic Native American lore? Or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had bad vibes in Mendocino National Forest from a Wendigo? The Work Stalker. A few years back, I had this really creepy experience with an older coworker of mine that still kind of shakes me to this day. It happened at this place that I'd been working at for a couple of years at that point. The place was a small factory of sorts, with only less than a handful of employees, including myself. One day, though, my boss introduced us to this new, older guy that he'd brought in to start working in the other, newer side of the factory. You see, the factory where he worked had 2 different sides to it. One side for beeswax, and one side for wood production. My boss had brought him in because they went to church together, and the wood production on the other side had a religious significance. The new, older coworker worked there with us for about 1 month before he approached me one day and introduced himself to me. He seemed like a nice guy and even came back to give me a Hershey kiss not long after that. A couple months later, I got asked by our boss if I could go pick up my new older coworker, probably because his car was broken down or something. I agreed to it. So my boss asked me if it was okay to give the coworker my phone number so that we could coordinate via text. I said it was fine and went on my way. I brought him back to the factory with no problems. Soon after that, though, I started to get random and sporadic texts from him late at night. At first, the texts were just about us, maybe hanging out soon, while simultaneously apologizing to me because he knew he was much older than I. But then, the texts started to get pretty pervy, and they would be as long as a mini book. The texts were just long, misspelled, random, pervy compilations. I tried to just ignore the texts, but that only made them start coming more frequently. In the midst of all this one day, my roommates were scrounging for a ride to a casino only a few miles from our house. I gave them a few dollars for a ride, and they said that they'd find their own ride back. So, imagine my surprise when they returned only a couple hours later with their own ride, all right. Their ride was my creepy coworker. Not only was I creeped the hell out that this pervy jerk now knew where I lived, but I also didn't know how he came to give my roommates that ride. Was it just sheer coincidence or something more? A few days after that, I went to visit a friend at his apartment that was located on our main street, running through our small, historic downtown area. When I came downstairs from his apartment, as he was located on the second floor, I made my usual turn, walking on the sidewalk in front of all the main street shops. As I walked past one of the shops that was maybe 2 doors down from my friend's apartment, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. But it couldn't be, could it? To my great dismay, it was him. My creepy-ass older coworker, standing in the doorway of one of the shops and smiling creepily at me from under a black top hat. A couple of weeks after that little incident, I noticed him again as I left my friend's apartment. He was just standing on the sidewalk with that same creepy grin plastered on his gaunt face. Since I had already informed my friend after the last incident, I simply texted him real quick to let him know the creep was back. I got into my car and left after sending the text. So I didn't find out until later that the creepy coworker was gone by the time my friend got downstairs to the sidewalk. At that point, though, the texts were still coming even faster than before. He was even threatening to come by my house if I didn't respond. Long, provocative texts dictating what he'd like to have happened between us if he did just happen to show up at my house. When I would see him during the day at work, though, he would act as though everything were normal, giving no hint of his nighttime persona. After seeing him yet again as I left my friend's apartment, I just so happened to overhear a couple coworkers of mine standing around discussing how weird our new, older coworker was. Right then, I stepped in and joined the convo, finally showing one of my other coworkers the text messages that the creep had been sending me. I had been working with that particular coworker for a few years, but I didn't know him too well. He was one of those people who came off kind of grumpy and distant. Still, I told him and my other coworker not to say anything. They both nodded in agreement, and we went our separate ways to finish up for the day. When I came into work the next day, though, my boss immediately called me into his office. My boss told me that he'd been informed of the situation and the texts, and he wanted to see my phone to read them. I told my boss that I didn't really want to get anyone in trouble, but he said that was besides the point and that my situation needed to be addressed. My boss also stated that my older coworker had no right or reason to be texting me and talking to me the way he was talking to me. The boss must have had a pretty good talk with him, because all the crap stopped from the older coworker after that. The other grumpy coworker of mine apologized to me for saying something to the boss, but I completely understood, and I was actually pretty grateful to him for that. I should have been the one to take the initiative to talk to the boss about it, but I was just too chicken. Fortunately, though, that situation seemed to work out for all involved, because life went on as usual, and everyone involved acted as though nothing had ever happened. Well, I can't really say that, because that situation actually caused the grumpy coworker and I to talk more, and we started dating. We were together for about 3 years, and then we got married. So, creepy old coworker, let's not ever meet again, or I think my husband will certainly have something to say about it. Our bizarre experiences with the forest behind our house eventually forced us to move out. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted. And she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless, though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the 3rd or 4th time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking. I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it, despite the fact I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window, wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside, and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent. And one night, my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors, and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being opened that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there, in the forest behind our house at night. But I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. Crazy incident in the forest in West Virginia. So the area is deep in the Monongahela Forest in Virginia. I was doing some hiking there alone, trying to explore the new area, seeing what's out there. Everything was going pretty smooth in general, except for one occurrence that had gotten me blown away completely. By the way, I'm a 37-year-old male, been hiking in Forest Mountains many times, never had an issue. Anyway, so I'm walking in the forest. It was at around 4 p.m. I was alone. I had everything on me, including a radio beacon, a compass, GPS, on my phone, and smartwatch. So, as you can see, taking my precautions in case I get lost, so that I can figure out my whereabouts and get back. I also had printed maps on me. While walking, I all of a sudden felt some sort of weird, very weird quietness, as if, it was the vacuum. No birds chirping, just quietness. And what's weird about it is that it was so quiet that I could hear, the humming in my ears that you sometimes get to hear in very quiet areas. I'm thinking, okay, quite odd. First, though, is that there might be a predator in the vicinity, so I was trying to see for that. I did carry something to protect myself with, in case I get attacked or something. Anyway, I just keep walking. No predator, but the quietness just was there. It's weird. I did not even see any birds anymore, just trees. I also noticed that the weather started getting worse, like it became cloudy in a weird way. I don't know how to explain, and long story short, the weather got bad pretty much out of nowhere. So at this point, I kind of started feeling I don't know how to describe it. I guess uneasiness. I decided to go back. And here's this. All of a sudden, GPS is out on both phone smartwatch. And the compass is spinning, as if there is like a magnet close by, or something like that. That got me very concerned, because it pretty much means that I can't find out where to go in case I get lost. I started walking back. None of my navigational tools are working. I kind of am still going back, just kind of orienting myself by the way I came there. All of a sudden, I see the clouds above are really odd. It's like most of the clouds are weird gray color, but they are not like clouds, but more kind of like fog, which is really way up. Then there was another cloud, kind of surrounded by gray clouds, which was black. I have never seen such cloud before. It was almost like night sky. Then the craziness happened. All of a sudden, I hear something like music, like a town clock bell or something like that, like, doing it every freaking 10 seconds or so. I don't know. At that time, I just got scared, like super scared. And I just started running very, very fast back to where I came from. I was running and running. And then, eventually, I noticed that the weather got better. It was no longer cloudy. Clouds weren't in fact visible anywhere near. I looked at my compass and GPS, and it was back up. I was in fact running in correct direction. After that, I just went back to the place where I parked and left. Later that day, I looked up weather forecast for that area. There wasn't supposed to be any cloudiness anywhere near. It was supposed to be a sunny day with only episodical sporadic clouds. I told my story to my buddies, also hikers. They say it might have been that I could have maybe fallen and maybe had a dream of that. But I don't think so, because I don't remember falling and having a dream. Anyway, it's kind of a weird story. Maybe there is a logical explanation. I don't know. Magnetic storm. Maybe something on the sun. The thing where sun exudes too much radiation. Any thoughts? Black stick man phenomenon. I have always denied anything supernatural, but this experience changed my view on the world. I am now obsessed with reading people's stories, or anything new that has been posted about these things specifically. Here is my story to share with all you open-minded folk. First of all, here's a little bit about the area it happened in. I live just off the Isle of Skye in Scotland. In the village where I live, there's 2 bridges linking the mainland to Skye. Between the bridges is a wee island that has a lighthouse and 2 cottages going back hundreds of years. Famously, Gavin Maxwell resided in one of them. Anyway, there's always been a lot of folklore around the lighthouse. Everyone who has worked there over the centuries has always said the same story, which is that they heard loud voices calling loudly outside the building and a massive change in atmosphere. But none of the workers who stayed there, from countries all over the world mind, could ever identify where exactly it was coming from or understand what the language was. Nor did they see who or what was calling out. Regardless of this, I don't know if perhaps my experience is linked to the folklore, but it happened in the exact same area, which, for me, personally made my encounter all the more creepy. The encounter. One night in the spring of 2019, I was running the Sky Bridge after work at around 9 p.m. I stopped to take rest on the first smaller bridge between the cottages and the mainland. The bridge was in complete darkness, and I was using my torch to see where I was going. I leaned on the barrier to catch my breath, looking out over the moonlit loch. When I turned my head and looked in the direction of the distant streetlights, about 100 meters or so away, I was utterly stunned. The hairs stood up all over me, and my nerves were shot to pieces. I locked my eyes on what seemed to be a 12-foot giant blurry stick figure cross the road, almost the height of the streetlights. It had no features other than see-through shades of dark blue and black. Its legs and arms were the same long, thin shape of its body, as was its tall, featureless, squared head. What's more disturbing is the millisecond I saw it, I felt an overwhelming feeling of vulnerability and dread. It was a dramatic change in the air and a very terrible atmosphere. The scariest part for me was that when I watched this thing cross the road from the right side of the road, my side, to left, it took long, smooth, slow strides and didn't seem to make contact with the ground. It glided with its steps. When it reached the other side, it went through the stone wall that follows along the road into the blackness, and then instantly reappeared back on my side. It then proceeded to cross the road over and over. This happened around 5 times until it never reappeared. This is the only thing I've ever witnessed in my life I cannot explain, and it utterly shocked me to my core. And now, I really am just mesmerized. There really are weird things going on in the world. Since that day, I'm very nervous about going through there. It's always in the back of my mind, even when I drive to work in daylight. Please, if anyone on here has had a similar experience, please contact me. I had never even heard of anything like this before. Not Everlyn, bloody slender man. Then I find online that people have had incredibly similar experiences to me. That made it crystal clear in my mind that I really had seen something, and it can't be a coincidence. I've been fascinated ever since. Thank you. I encountered a humanoid, and here's my experience. Okay. So this happened to my friend, and around 2005, I was 20 years old. We had a couple of beers each earlier in the night, so pretty much sober. We were driving on Highway 59 right outside of Houston, near an area called Kingwood. This is the first time I have tried to write the experience down, so bear with me. And feel free to ask me any questions or details if you'd like. So it was about 3 a.m., and he was driving. I was in the passenger seat. It was a large 3-lane highway and was illuminated quite well with those orange-colored streetlights. In the distance, we noticed something in the middle of the freeway. It looked to me like a man on crutches, and my immediate thought was that it was a bum or something. But when we got closer, it was apparent that it was without a doubt not human. Now, here is where I will describe in the most detail I can what I saw. What I thought were crutches were actually its arms, but they extended well above its head, Large, fleshy poles is what it looked like. Very knobbed and non-uniform. It did not have legs, but rather some type of abdomen or nub, from what I could tell from behind. Its head was very shocking. It looked like a bulbous mass, like a giant water balloon slopped to one side, very large. The whole thing was a rust-like color. I'm not sure if this was its actual color, because it was also the color of the street lamps. I would say a good 7 or 8 feet tall. At this point, we're completely freaking out. He's screaming, and I'm yelling every obscenity I know. He pulls into the left lane so as not to hit it, and me being in the passenger seat got an up-close and personal look at the thing. Its body seemed wrapped in what I would call mummy-like wrappings, but embedded and haphazardly put on, mostly around the abdomen nub area. But the face was the most shocking part. There wasn't really a face there, just folds of skin. This may sound gross or crass, but I don't really know how else to describe it. It looked vaginal and disgusting. It should also be noted that it paid absolutely no attention to us. Also, the thing was propelling itself with those pole/arms and using its abdomen thing as leverage or something. Kind of difficult to explain, but I could try again if anyone is wondering. It was also going at a very fast speed when our vehicle moved past the thing. It wasn't like someone running, but maybe like a car going a little under the speed limit. After we passed, I looked at him and asked if we should turn back, and he said no Fingway. So, the car ride home was silence punctuated with what the F every few minutes. The next day we got together and talked about it and tried to explain to our other friends what we had seen. And every time we see each other, even after many years, we always bring it up to each other. Now, I have no possible explanation for what this thing was. I have searched many times online typing in every description I have, and I always come up with nothing. I even thought about calling into one of those late-night radio shows, but I am too shy for that. The main reason I am writing this is because I still desperately want to know what this thing was, and I wonder if anyone has ever seen anything similar. If you guys could point me in a direction to someone who could be of any help to me, I would be very appreciative. I will add one more thing. After thinking about this creature for many years and doing some research, I wonder if this was some type of bat. Although it wasn't flying, the fleshy pole arms do remind me of a bat when it's walking. How the wings fold up, and the face was folds of skin like a bat's nose. But that's about all I have. Sorry it is so long, but I felt all the info was necessary. Thank you all for watching. I hope you aren't all too spooked. Something about humanoid things just really creeps me out. Thanks again for watching. If you have any recommendations for stories or constructive criticism, please let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing as it helps the channel out a lot. Thanks for listening. Stay spooky.